The mysterious thief. Jack Carter sat near the flickering fire, sharpening his knife. The wind howled outside his makeshift shelter, carrying the distant echoes of creatures that roamed the night. He had been stranded on this alien planet for over a month, and every day was a battle for survival. Food was scarce. Water was even scarcer. Tonight, he was exhausted. He had spent the entire day searching for supplies in the abandoned ruins nearby. He had managed to find some canned food from his crashed ship, just enough to last him a week if he rationed carefully. He had also collected fresh water from a hidden underground stream, a rare and valuable find. He leaned back, his muscles aching. His stomach growled, but he forced himself to eat only a little. He had to make everything last. Then he heard it. A rustling sound. Jack froze. His hand tightened around his knife. He slowly turned his head toward the noise, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. His heart pounded in his chest. Something, or someone, was out there. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, another sound. This time, it came from behind his supplies, a faint scraping, like someone carefully shifting objects. Jack's eyes narrowed. Someone was stealing from him. He moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. He reached for his rifle, his fingers closing around the cold metal. Then, in one swift motion, he grabbed his flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness. For a split second, Jack saw a small figure crouched near his supply stash. The light reflected off wide, frightened eyes. The figure gasped and bolted. Jack jumped to his feet. Hey! The thief was fast, too fast. It darted into the shadows, vanishing into the ruins. Jack didn't think. He ran after it. His boots pounded against the hard ground as he chased the figure through the wreckage of an ancient city. The ruins were vast, a maze of broken walls and crumbling towers. The thief was small, agile, slipping through gaps where Jack had to force his way through. But Jack was relentless. He had been a soldier once, trained for pursuit. He wouldn't let some mystery thief take the supplies he had fought so hard to gather. The chase led deeper into the ruins. The thief never looked back. It just ran, weaving through the debris like it knew this place well. Jack pushed himself harder, closing the distance. Then suddenly, the thief disappeared. Jack skidded to a stop. His breath was heavy. He shined his flashlight around. Nothing. Just silent ruins and cold air. Jack took a cautious step forward. The ground beneath him felt uneven. He knelt down, brushing aside the dust. A hole. A small entrance, barely big enough for a child to slip through. It led into darkness. Jack hesitated. This was a bad idea. He didn't know what was down there. He had no backup, no escape plan. But he had no choice. That thief had stolen his food and water. Without them, he wouldn't survive long. Taking a deep breath, Jack gripped his rifle and slid into the hole. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for him to crawl through. The air was damp, filled with the scent of old stone and something else, something rotten. Jack's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he kept moving forward. After what felt like forever, the tunnel widened. Jack climbed to his feet, shining his light around. He was in an underground chamber. And that's when he saw it. His stolen supplies scattered across the floor. But Jack didn't care about the supplies anymore, because standing in the dim light, clutching a small piece of stolen bread, was a thin alien boy, his skin pale blue, his eyes large and hollow with hunger. And behind him, in the shadows, were more figures. Jack's stomach sank. The thief wasn't stealing for himself. He was stealing to feed them into the ruins. Jack stood frozen, gripping his rifle as his flashlight flickered over the alien boy. The kid was small, barely reaching Jack's waist, with thin limbs and hollow cheeks. His skin was a pale shade of blue, and his large dark eyes reflected the light like polished glass. His breath came in quick, panicked gasps, and he clutched a small piece of stolen bread as if his life depended on it. But it wasn't the boy that made Jack's stomach twist. It was what stood behind him. More figures. At first, Jack thought they were just shadows, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw other children, just as small, just as starved. Some were hiding behind broken stone pillars, peeking out with fearful eyes. Others were curled up on the ground, too weak to stand. Jack's pulse pounded. This wasn't a gang of thieves. This was a group of starving orphans. The boy took a cautious step back, his gaze flicking between Jack and the stolen supplies. He looked ready to run again. Jack slowly lowered his rifle. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I just want my supplies back." The boy's grip on the bread tightened. Jack sighed. He looked around the underground chamber. The walls were old, cracked, and covered in strange alien symbols. There were remnants of makeshift beds, thin blankets, scraps of fabric. Empty containers were scattered around, some with faded labels in an alien language. They had been living down here. Surviving. Barely. Jack clenched his jaw. He needed that food. Without it, he wouldn't last long. But looking at these kids, he realized something. They needed it even more. A sudden noise echoed through the tunnel. A deep metallic clank, like something heavy shifting above them. Jack stiffened. The alien kids flinched. Their eyes widened with terror. Jack turned toward the tunnel he had crawled through. His flashlight beam flickered against the damp stone walls. The air felt heavier. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Not small, quick footsteps like the alien kids. These were slow, heavy, purposeful. And they weren't alone. Jack's instincts screamed at him. He had spent years in combat, and he knew the sound of multiple boots approaching. Someone else was coming. And they weren't friendly. The alien boy dropped the bread and grabbed Jack's wrist, his tiny fingers gripping with surprising strength. He pointed toward another tunnel at the far end of the chamber, a second escape route. Jack hesitated. If he left now, he'd never get his supplies back. But if he stayed, the footsteps grew louder. Jack didn't wait. "Go," he whispered. The boy let go of his wrist and ran toward the tunnel. The other children followed, their thin legs moving as fast as they could. Jack brought up the rear, keeping his rifle ready. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Jack stole one last glance at the chamber, just in time to see a massive, armored figure step out of the shadows. Its face was hidden beneath a smooth, reflective helmet. Its body was covered in dark, segmented armor, and in its hands, it held a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. Jack barely had time to register the creature before it turned its head toward him. The thing knew he was there. Jack swore under his breath and dove into the tunnel after the kids. Behind him, the chamber exploded with light. A blast of energy struck the stone wall just inches from where he had been standing. The heat scorched his back as he ran. The kids were already ahead of him, moving quickly through the winding passage. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps. He could hear more footsteps, more than one pursuer. Who the hell were these guys? And why were they after these kids? Jack pushed himself harder, dodging low-hanging rocks and loose debris. The tunnel twisted and turned, the air growing colder with every step. Then, just as Jack thought they were about to reach safety, the ground gave way. Jack felt himself falling. For a split second, time seemed to slow. He saw the alien boy ahead, his eyes widening in horror. The tunnel floor had collapsed into a deep underground cavern. Jack barely had time to react before he hit the ground. Hard. Pain shot through his ribs as he rolled onto his back. His rifle skidded across the stone floor, just out of reach. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see. Above him, the alien boy peered down from the edge of the broken tunnel, his face twisted in fear. Jack groaned, pushing himself up. His whole body ached, but nothing felt broken. Then he heard the sound that made his blood run cold. The mercenaries were still coming. Jack looked around. He was in some kind of ancient underground temple. Massive stone pillars stretched high into the darkness. Strange alien markings covered the walls, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. But Jack didn't have time to admire the view. A low growl echoed from the shadows. Not from the mercenaries. Something else was down here. Jack grabbed his rifle and forced himself to his feet. His eyes darted around the cavern. The alien boy was still at the edge of the tunnel above, staring down at him. He looked torn, like he wanted to jump down but didn't know if he should. "Go," Jack hissed. "Get out of here." The boy hesitated. Then, from the darkness behind Jack, came the sound of claws scraping against stone. Jack turned slowly. Two glowing eyes peered at him from the shadows. And then, the creature lunged. The hidden truth. Jack barely had time to raise his rifle before the creature lunged. A blur of movement, a flash of glistening teeth. Jack rolled to the side just in time. Something massive slammed into the stone floor where he had been standing, sending cracks through the ancient surface. Dust and debris shot into the air as Jack scrambled backward, raising his weapon. The thing was unlike anything he had ever seen. It stood on four powerful limbs, its elongated body covered in a mix of black exoskeleton and thick, sinewy muscle. Its eyes glowed yellow, slitted like a predator's, and its mouth. God, its mouth, split open into jagged, overlapping rows of teeth. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired. The rifle kicked back in his hands, and a blue bolt of energy shot through the cavern. It struck the creature square in the chest, but instead of dropping, the thing let out an ear-piercing shriek. The sound rattled Jack's skull. The monster charge. Jack dove behind a broken stone pillar as the creature slammed into it with incredible force. The impact sent chunks of alien stone flying in all directions. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to process the situation. Trapped underground, low on ammo, wounded ribs, and now he was face to face with a nightmare. Above him, the alien boy still clung to the broken ledge, watching. His wide, fearful eyes darted between Jack and the monster. He looked like he wanted to help, but what could a kid do against something like this? Jack knew he had seconds to act. The creature twisted its head toward him, its mouth dripping with thick, black saliva. Jack raised his rifle, then spotted something. A weak point. The creature's underbelly, right where its exoskeleton plates met, had a thin, exposed section of flesh. Jack didn't hesitate. As the monster lunged again, Jack dropped to one knee, aimed for the gap, and fired. The energy bolt pierced through. A horrific screech filled the cavern as the creature staggered backward, thick, dark blood oozing from the wound. Its limbs shook violently before it finally collapsed, its body twitching before going still. Jack exhaled. It was dead. But he wasn't safe yet. He looked up at the alien boy. "You still there, kid?" The boy nodded. Then, without warning, he leaped from the ledge. Jack's heart stopped for a second. Was the kid crazy? But just before hitting the ground, the boy twisted midair and landed in a perfect crouch, as if the fall was nothing. Jack raised an eyebrow. Okay, that was impressive. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed Jack's sleeve and pulled, motioning for him to follow. Jack hesitated. He had no idea who these kids were, no idea why they were hiding underground, or why mercenaries were hunting them. But he had just saved their lives. And now this kid, this thief, was trying to save his. Jack sighed. "All right, kid. Lead the way." A dark secret below. Jack followed the boy through the underground tunnels. The passage was tight, lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly along the walls. The deeper they went, the more Jack realized this wasn't just a random cave system. It was something ancient. Finally, the tunnel opened into a hidden chamber. Jack stepped inside and stopped cold. There were at least 20 more alien children. Some were huddled together, too weak to move. Others looked up with wide, fearful eyes. They were thin, malnourished, starving. Their skin, different shades of blue and green, was covered in dust and bruises. Jack's stomach twisted. These kids weren't survivors of a crash. They had been hiding here for a long time. The alien boy pointed toward a small pile of stolen supplies, the cans of food, water pouches, and medical gear Jack had been hunting for. Jack's chest tightened. The kid hadn't stolen to survive alone. He had stolen to keep them all alive. Jack let out a slow breath. Damn it. He walked over, grabbed one of the water pouches, and tossed it to the alien boy. The boy's eyes widened in shock. Jack smirked. Go ahead. You earned it. The kid hesitated, then tore it open, gulping the water like he hadn't had a drink in days. The other children watched silently. Jack knelt, scanning the group. How long have you been here? The boy hesitated, then pointed toward the wall. Jack followed his gaze, and his blood ran cold. Carved into the stone were markings. Tally marks. Hundreds of them. Jack swallowed hard. You've been hiding here for years. The boy nodded. Jack felt sick. But before he could say anything, a loud explosion shook the entire cavern. The kid screamed. Rocks crumbled from the ceiling. Dust filled the air. Jack grabbed his rifle and turned toward the tunnel. From the darkness, a cold, mechanical voice echoed. You have nowhere left to run. Jack's grip tightened. His heart pounded. The mercenaries had found them. The hunters arrive. The ground trembled as another explosion rocked the cavern. Dust and debris rained down, sending the children into a frantic scramble for cover. Jack's heart raced as his mind raced through possible escape routes, but there was no time. The mercenaries were close, too close. He crouched low behind a crumbling pillar, pulling the rifle closer. The children huddled in the shadows, their fearful eyes watching him for any sign of direction. The small alien boy, the one who had led him this far, clung to Jack's side. His hands were shaking, but he didn't let go. What are they going to do to us? The boy whispered. His voice was barely audible, choked with fear. Jack didn't answer at first. He didn't have the words. His mind was racing, processing everything at once. The ruined chamber, the children's hollow eyes, the mercenaries outside. He had to protect them. He had to find a way to stop the mercenaries from getting their hands on the kids. They weren't just ordinary hunters. They were trained, ruthless, and they had advanced weaponry. Jack wasn't sure if he could fight them off. Not alone. But he couldn't let them capture these children. Not after what he had seen. Not after learning how they had survived, living in fear for so long. They were innocent, just like him, just trying to stay alive. Then he heard the footsteps. Heavy boots, echoing down the tunnel. Move, Jack barked, grabbing the boy and pulling him behind a fallen stone slab. The other children scrambled after them. Some crawling, others limping with exhaustion. Jack tried to count them, his eyes scanning the group. There were more than he had originally thought, at least a dozen. From behind the pillar, Jack peeked around. He could see the mercenaries now, moving cautiously into the cavern, their helmets reflecting the dim blue glow from the strange symbols etched into the stone. They were not like the ordinary soldiers Jack had known. These were cold, methodical hunters. Their movements were precise, controlled. They were looking for something. One of them, a tall figure in heavy armor, spoke into a small device. Target located. All units, move in. Jack's breath caught in his throat. They knew where they were, and they weren't going to let them escape. Stay down, Jack whispered to the boy. Do not make a sound. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with terror. Jack's grip on his rifle tightened. He had only a few shots left. If he was going to survive, he needed a plan. But there was no time to think. The mercenaries were already getting closer. Then the ground beneath Jack's feet shook again. A loud mechanical noise echoed through the cavern as a massive vehicle appeared from the far tunnel, pushing through the wreckage. It was a heavily armored transport, big enough to carry a squad of soldiers. Its massive wheels churned the stone beneath them, and its engines roared to life as it stopped just outside the chamber. The mercenaries, clearly anticipating its arrival, rushed forward. One of them spoke, his voice distorted through a helmet speaker. "Secure the area. Begin extraction." Extraction. Jack's heart sank. They weren't here to kill the children. They were here to capture them, to use them for something. And he couldn't let that happen. Jack swallowed hard. He had no backup, no reinforcements. He was alone in this alien world, surrounded by creatures who were more dangerous than he could even imagine. But if he didn't do something now, those kids would be taken. He had to act. Jack glanced around, his mind working quickly. He needed a distraction, something to throw the mercenaries off track long enough for the kids to escape. Then his eyes fell on the ancient symbols glowing on the walls. There was a pattern to them, something that didn't quite make sense. They were connected to the stone pillars, some kind of mechanism that he could manipulate. Maybe, just maybe, he could use the environment to his advantage. Without thinking, Jack stood up, rifle in hand, and sprinted toward the nearest pillar. He heard the mercenaries shout, but it was too late. Jack had already reached the stone lever embedded deep into the ground. He grabbed it with both hands and yanked with all his strength. There was a low groaning sound, and then the ground shuddered. The ancient symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and Jack could feel the air around him crackle with energy. The walls trembled again, this time more violently, as if the entire cavern were waking up. The mercenaries were already closing in on him. They shouted orders, their weapons raised. But Jack had one chance to make this work. He pulled harder on the lever, and suddenly, the stone ceiling above them began to shift. A massive section of rock began to fall, and the mercenaries rushed back in panic. Jack ducked behind a pillar, watching as chunks of stone and debris rained down. The mercenaries scattered, but not before one of them was struck, pinned beneath a heavy slab. The others moved quickly to help, distracted for just a moment, just enough. "Now," Jack shouted to the kids. The alien boy, who had been staring at the chaos, quickly grabbed the hand of a younger child and pulled him toward the exit tunnel. The other kids followed, their movements shaky but determined. Jack knew they couldn't stay here for long. He had just given them a few precious minutes to escape. He had to keep the mercenaries busy. He grabbed a handful of loose stones and hurled them down the tunnel where the mercenaries were trying to regroup. The sound of the rocks crashing against the walls echoed through the cavern, drawing the mercenaries' attention once more. It was a small victory. But as Jack sprinted toward the exit, he knew it wasn't enough. The mercenaries weren't going to stop. They wouldn't give up until they had captured every last one of the kids. But for now, at least, they had a chance to escape. Escape or die. The tremors from the collapsing ceiling echoed through the cavern, but Jack didn't stop running. He kept his eyes on the exit tunnel, his chest heaving with each breath. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. How far ahead were the mercenaries? Was the entire group of kids safe? Was there any chance of outrunning the soldiers in this maze of ruins? The ground still shook beneath his boots, the chaos in the cavern reverberating around them. The mercenaries were close, too close. Jack could hear their footsteps echoing behind him as he pushed forward through the winding tunnel. The kids were ahead, but they were moving slower now, the exhaustion catching up with them. The alien boy, the one who had started this whole mess by stealing Jack's supplies, looked over his shoulder and met Jack's eyes. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but there was something in his eyes, something that said he didn't believe they could make it. Jack gritted his teeth. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after everything they had been through, not after everything he had just sacrificed to save them. He ran faster. "Keep going. Get to the surface," he shouted to the kids, though his voice sounded hoarse from the adrenaline and exhaustion. The alien boy nodded and turned to the others, urging them forward. Jack could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of the unknown, of what would happen if they were caught, but also the fear of what they had already endured. This wasn't just a game for them. This was survival. The tunnel ahead widened into a massive underground chamber, the walls lined with ancient alien carvings that glowed faintly in the dark. It looked like an old temple, long abandoned and forgotten, hidden beneath layers of dust and rock. But Jack didn't have time to admire the architecture. The mercenaries weren't far behind. He glanced back, and that's when he saw them. The flash of helmets and armor, the steady, deliberate pace of soldiers moving through the tunnel behind them. They had weapons aimed ahead, their advanced energy rifles casting shadows along the walls. Jack's mind raced. They would catch up. His hand instinctively reached for the grenade pouches at his belt. He had a few explosives left, enough to slow the mercenaries down. But he didn't have the luxury of making a stand. The kids needed him. He had to make a decision: fight or escape. Jack knew the answer. He wasn't going to fight these mercenaries and survive. Not with the odds stacked this high, not with no reinforcements. He had to get the kids to safety. He had to buy them enough time to escape before they were trapped again. He turned to the boy. Head for the surface. The boy nodded and pulled the others toward the far end of the chamber, toward a set of rubble-covered stairs that led upward. Jack watched as they disappeared into the shadows, making their way toward freedom. But Jack didn't follow immediately. He paused, scanning the room one last time. The mercenaries were closing in, and the time to act was running out. Jack pulled out one of the last grenades, armed it, and hurled it toward the tunnel the mercenaries were coming through. Boom! The explosion rocked the chamber. The shockwave sent a blast of air and debris flying, sending the mercenaries stumbling backward. The walls cracked, and huge chunks of stone fell from above, creating a barrier between Jack and the soldiers. The mercenaries shouted, their voices full of confusion and anger. Jack didn't wait for them to recover. He turned and sprinted toward the stairs, his legs burning with every step. He was almost there when he heard the sound of rushing feet, loud, urgent. He turned just in time to see one of the mercenaries emerge from the smoke of the explosion. A huge man, his face obscured by a helmet, lifted a blaster rifle and aimed directly at Jack. In that moment, Jack knew he had no choice. The grenade had slowed the mercenaries, but it hadn't stopped them. He would have to fight for his life. Without hesitation, Jack dove toward a large stone slab, using it for cover. The mercenary's first shot struck the stone next to Jack's head, sending a spray of rock shards into his face. Jack winced, but he didn't have time to wipe the blood from his cheek. The mercenary fired again, but Jack was already moving, rolling to the side. He drew his sidearm, a small, compact pistol, and fired a quick shot at the mercenary's shoulder. The shot landed, but the soldier barely flinched, his armor absorbing the blow. Jack's pulse raced as he fired again, narrowly missing the soldier's head. The mercenary charged forward, his blaster aimed for Jack's chest. Jack could see the determination in his eyes, the calculation. He was going to kill him. But Jack wasn't done yet. He ducked just as the mercenary's shot rang out, narrowly avoiding death. The blast hit the stone behind him, sending a shower of rocks flying. Jack took advantage of the opening and fired his pistol directly into the mercenary's visor. The soldier staggered back, his helmet cracked, the internal systems no longer functioning. The mercenary collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Jack wasted no time. He grabbed the soldier's blaster rifle and sprinted toward the stairs. His legs burned, but he didn't stop. He could hear the mercenaries regaining their composure behind him. They were far from defeated, but he had bought enough time. As he reached the stairs, he could see the children at the top, huddled together, waiting. The alien boy's eyes locked with his, full of fear and hope. Jack didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, charging up the stairs, his breath ragged. The mercenaries were still coming. But now, they were running out of time. They were almost out, and there was no turning back. A hero's choice. The sound of Jack's footsteps echoed through the narrow tunnel as he climbed the final steps, his breath shallow and ragged. His muscles screamed for rest, but there was no time for that. The mercenaries were still pursuing them, angrier now, more determined. Jack could hear their voices behind him, shouting orders, the crackling of their communication devices faintly reaching his ears. Almost there. Jack's pulse raced as he reached the top of the stairs. The exit to the surface was just ahead, but it wasn't a straightforward escape. The entrance was narrow, surrounded by jagged rocks and remnants of alien ruins. He looked back. The children were almost at the top, moving quickly, but there were still a few stragglers. Their faces were pale, their legs trembling from exhaustion. The alien boy, the one who had started this all, was still leading the way, though his tiny body seemed on the verge of collapse. Jack's gaze lingered on him, then shot back toward the entrance. If the kids reached the surface, they'd be safe. At least, safer than they were down here. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave them behind. He turned to face the kids, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. Go. Get out of here now. I'll hold them off. The alien boy, who had been running with all his strength, stopped in his tracks. He turned back to look at Jack, his wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. No, the boy whispered, shaking his head. We can't leave you. You helped us. Jack's chest tightened at the boy's words. He had known this moment was coming. The moment when the kids would have to choose whether to trust him or leave him behind. It was the hardest decision of his life. But Jack knew what had to be done. The mercenaries were too close, and if they caught up with the kids now, they wouldn't stand a chance. Jack pushed the boy toward the opening. You don't have a choice. If you stay, you'll be captured. If you get to the surface, you'll have a chance. You all will. Now go. The boy opened his mouth to protest again, but Jack raised a hand, silencing him. There was no time for debate. With a final, reluctant glance, the boy turned and rushed through the opening. The other kids followed, the sound of their footsteps fading as they made their way into the night. Jack stayed behind, keeping his eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. There was no time to waste. Jack grabbed his rifle, his hand still shaking from the adrenaline. The mercenaries were almost there, and he could hear the heavy boots of their armored suits getting closer. He backed up against the rocks at the edge of the entrance, aiming his rifle down the passage. His pulse quickened. He had only one chance to make this work. The first mercenary appeared, his helmet reflecting the dim light. He was carrying a blaster rifle, his movements calculated. He didn't see Jack yet, but he was getting closer. Jack held his breath, trying to stay as still as possible. Focus. Jack didn't wait for the mercenary to get closer. He fired first. The shot rang out, the blaster bolt striking the mercenary in the chest. The soldier dropped to the ground, his armor sparking with a burst of energy. Jack didn't hesitate. He quickly reloaded and aimed for the next soldier. Two more appeared, moving cautiously down the tunnel. They had their rifles raised, ready to fire. Jack knew he couldn't take them both out before they noticed him. His heart pounded in his chest as he adjusted his aim. He fired again, hitting one of the soldiers in the leg. The mercenary screamed in pain, stumbling backward. The other soldier returned fire, but Jack was already moving. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a shot that would have ended him. The rocks exploded where he had been standing, sending debris flying in all directions. Jack felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as a piece of rock grazed his skin, but he didn't stop. He kept moving, firing back with quick, precise shots, his instincts kicking in. He had to hold them off, but there were too many. His ammo was running low, and the soldiers were closing in. One more shot. Jack ducked behind a boulder, his heart pounding in his chest. His rifle was almost empty, but the mercenaries were close. Too close. He reached for his last grenade, a small plasma charge that could create a huge explosion. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would give the kids enough time to get away. Jack pulled the pin and threw the grenade toward the advancing mercenaries. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave threw Jack back, slamming him into the stone wall behind him. His ears rang, and his vision blurred for a moment. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the mercenaries staggering, disoriented by the blast. He didn't wait. Jack grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the exit. He could see the kids now, silhouetted against the night sky. They had reached the surface. They were safe. But Jack wasn't out of danger yet. He could hear the mercenaries recovering, calling for reinforcements. If they didn't stop them, they would come back with more soldiers, more firepower. He had to make a choice, escape or die trying. Jack knew he couldn't go back into the tunnels. The mercenaries would have the entire area surrounded by now. His best chance was to get to the surface and find somewhere to hide. Somewhere the mercenaries couldn't find him. With one last look toward the kids, Jack turned and ran. The rocky terrain was treacherous, but Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He vaulted over rocks, dodged between narrow gaps, and pushed forward, away from the mercenaries, and into the open wilderness. Behind him, he heard the shouts of the mercenaries as they reached the surface. But Jack was already moving too fast, too far. His body was screaming for rest, but Jack ignored it. He couldn't stop now. The kids were counting on him, and as he disappeared into the dark wilderness, he knew he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. Humanity's greatest strength. The night was thick with the scent of the alien wilderness, the air heavy and damp with mist. Jack Carter ran, his breath ragged, every muscle in his body protesting the effort. The ground beneath his boots was uneven, rocks and sharp grasses grabbing at his legs, but Jack barely noticed. His mind was focused solely on one thing, getting far enough away. His pulse was pounding in his ears as he ran deeper into the jungle, the sound of his footsteps echoing around him like a constant reminder that he was being hunted. The mercenaries weren't far behind. Jack could hear their voices, distant but clear. They were calling out to each other, coordinating their search, sweeping through the wilderness with advanced sensors. They had the advantage of technology. Jack had only his instincts and his determination. He couldn't let them catch him. The kids, he had made sure they were safe. They had reached the surface. He had seen them disappear into the night sky, the glowing lights of their makeshift escape shimmering in the distance as they climbed to a plateau beyond the alien ruins. They would be okay for now. But Jack didn't know how long that would last. He wasn't naive. The mercenaries would keep coming, and sooner or later they would catch up with him. He was expendable. And yet, as the thought crossed his mind, a strange sense of clarity washed over him. They were wrong. Jack had no intention of letting them win. He had come to this planet for a reason, and even though his survival was uncertain, he would fight with everything he had. Because he wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something greater. And that something was humanity. The choice that changed everything. As Jack stumbled through the undergrowth, something unexpected stopped him. He wasn't sure what it was at first, but then it hit him like a wave. The sound of distant voices. No, not just voices. Laughter. His first instinct was to freeze, to retreat into the shadows, but there was something familiar about the sound. He crept forward, crouching low to the ground, his heart hammering in his chest. He moved carefully, every step calculated, every movement deliberate. The voices grew louder, the laughter more distinct. It was close. Then, through the thick trees, he saw them. The kids. They were sitting in a circle around a small fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Their laughter was soft, but it was the sound of joy, of hope. They were alive. Jack stopped dead in his tracks, a mix of relief and exhaustion flooding through him. They had made it. They were safe. The alien boy, who had stolen his supplies and led him on this wild chase, was sitting at the center of the group. His eyes were bright, his face full of energy as he spoke to the others, gesturing wildly with his hands. The kids listened, some laughing, others nodding solemnly. Jack felt a surge of emotion. For a moment, he thought he might break down right there. But he knew he couldn't. The mercenaries were still hunting. If they found the kids now, there would be no escape. He turned to leave, but then he heard the alien boy's voice. "Jack." The boy was standing now, his eyes wide with excitement. "You came back. You're here." Jack hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward the group, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "I had to make sure you were safe," he said, his voice hoarse. The boy ran up to him, a big smile on his face. "We thought you were gone," he said, voice cracking with emotion. "We thought they had taken you." Jack looked at the other kids, some of them older, some younger. They all looked up at him, eyes full of gratitude, full of hope. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but for the first time since he'd landed on this godforsaken planet, Jack realized something. These kids had found a new life. And somehow, despite everything, he had become a part of it. He glanced back at the flickering fire, and that's when he saw it. A small glowing crystal nestled in the boy's palm. The same one he had seen earlier, when the boy had first stolen his supplies. The energy crystal. "What's that?" Jack asked, his voice quiet. The boy's eyes glinted. This is our future." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The boy smiled, holding the crystal up to the light. "We found this in the ruins. It's worth more than all the supplies in the world. If we can get it to the right people, we can trade it for everything we need to survive. Food, water, shelter, a way off this planet. It's all we need." Jack's mind whirled. He'd been fighting for survival for so long, he hadn't considered this possibility. A chance to leave this place behind, to give these kids a new life, a life beyond the ruins. But then his thoughts turned to the mercenaries. They would stop at nothing to get their hands on that crystal. If they found it, they would take it, and everything else these kids had. Suddenly, it all clicked. These kids weren't just survivors. They were the key to something greater. They had found hope where there was none, and they had something that could change everything. Jack didn't care about the danger anymore. The mercenaries, the fight, the struggle for survival. None of it mattered as long as these kids had a chance. They had already proven their strength by surviving on this planet. Now, they needed a chance to thrive. A new beginning. Jack turned back to the kids. "All right, kid," he said, his voice full of resolve. "Let's do this. We're getting out of here. Together." The boy's face lit up, and the others gathered around, their expressions a mix of relief and joy. They were no longer victims. They were survivors, and Jack was with them. They had one chance, but with humanity's greatest strength, hope, compassion, and determination, they would find a way to make it out alive. As Jack and the kids prepared to leave the safety of their hiding place, he realized that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for something bigger, a future worth living for, a life free from fear. And that was a fight he was ready to win.